Debussy plays with the resonances of the sounds, not with the sounds themselves. They blossom almost out of the water, of these reflections in the water, that the reality mixes up with the imagination. So much that every time compositionally he develops a system of echo. Echo cell, not that is in echo softer, but it says twice the same thing, as if in disbelief, as if startled. What is this? And each of these resonances has such an imagination at the tip of the fingers, the drops, the atmosphere, the moisture. It's not just the image, as the title of the book in which it's set. It's also about sensorial feelings, about extracting the sounds from the rest. And not a thematical development, rather motivic capsules of notes. In fact, he doesn't need a theme to develop. He just installs an atmosphere. For most composers, this would be the background for the melodic line that will have a thematical meaning in terms of intellectual development. Here it's more about sensations, about atmosphere, about cold, hot, warm, fear, expectation, mystery, especially mystery. In these reflections on the water, the first thing to do is not to play the theme or the thematic leitmotif loud, is to let it emerge from this sunken cathedral, to paraphrase one of the titles of his preludes. Of course, the pedal is the essential simulator of this music, because in a way, take off the pedal and you hear just chords, which are not obviously functional in harmony. So you have the pattern by 16th notes and the leitmotif floating above. And the chordal practice for pianists would be to voice the top part by staccatoing the bottom part, and also by opening the elbow in anticipation of the opening of the ascending fifth of the melody, as a hugging, like you surround by some affectionate hug. So you don't really play a harmonic projection of a fourth degree on the fifth degree, or some kind of even functional distant tonal cadence. Doesn't work. It's just a double drone or double ostinato. Those patches of sound are more like pointillism, like Seurat painted, which in the beginning appears awkward if you're too close to the painting, but as you go back in the painting, you focus and you realize beyond the apparent fog the reality of what the image appears to you, reveals to you, but not on the spot. So you have to avoid being shy to play too soft, and avoid to be too precise in the touch. If it's very surgical touch, with forky fingers precisely playing, even with the anacorda, would be matter-of-factish. finish, and you don't like that for Debussy. It has to be all suggested, hinted, precise, but from very close up. Like a sort of a whisper with drops on the water, the drops themselves. So it's all very unmaterial. And of course, the passionately interesting thing to do is to create a sensation of colors or atmospheric moods when there is a guideline, a little thin thread that goes to those repetitive echoes in the composer's idea, a idée fixe in the second half, in the so-called recap. It doesn't develop any, just redisplays itself with arpeggios, which adds to the fluidity, if any. And at the very end, in the coda section, when you have this dark drops, between the abysses in the dark waters. So that's good, the mystery. But you still have those three notes of the leitmotif, idée fixe, note choisie, in plural, note choisie, three of them. Of course, the opening of this, it's so reminiscent of Tchaikovsky's. It's just a joke. Of course, it doesn't have to do with it, but it's serendipity, most likely, that you have these three notes in the same key, which are like so many miles away, if not to mention. And please don't play softer the second time. Same. Just let it uncover its mystery. Many pianists who practice Debussy think about blurring in order to create that atmosphere. Now it's possible, but you also can use subterfuge, which is finger pedal, and then in these three chords you can hold most of the second and third, so you could take off the pedal in the middle to create a sense of less blur. Obviously, once you put up all the 88 dampers, it all resonates, and it should have resonance, but it shouldn't become blurry, especially if the acoustic in the hall you play it's already blurry. So your attention, your ear has to search always for clarity in Debussy, regardless if the final effect is wet or foggy or a little bit moist music, as if you have humidity on the windows, and all of a sudden the view of the landscape is slightly deformed by this humidity. It doesn't mean that it's deformed and blurry, it's just that it has this sense of filtered by the nature, and the mirror of the surface of this lake, if it is, in which the sky, the garden, and whatever landscape is reflected, is almost upside down, inevitably so. And there is something narcissistic in the typical sense of the mythology of Narcissus, who was contemplating his beauty in the water's reflection until he dropped in it and drowned. So there is something about reflection is a mirror of the reality, of the dream, of the mix-up of dream in reality. Something already Debussy had heard in Schumann so much. For instance, Eusebius in Carnival. Or something like Beginning of 119 by Brahms. Or the number 2 of Brahms 117. written in the end of the 1890s, when Debussy was already in his 30s. And anecdotically, Debussy went to meet Brahms, but in Vienna, Brahms's housekeeper told him that Herr Doctor Professor doesn't receive French composers. Or some variation of that anecdote, which is been sort of orally transmitted in the Paris Conservatory, at least when I was a student, as an opposition supposed to be of the French and the German school. But these two composers at different times of their lives search or find themselves in some kinship in the shores of daydreaming in a different way, but in a very, I think, surprising way, and in a way, inspiring way today, the way they mirror each other, at least in my view, and most likely in the resonances that it creates inside my soul when I hear it. And so I tend to imagine when Debussy, Brahms plays with all this 30 seconds flow. And then that is the leitmotif in Debussy's reflections in the water. That's possibly my desire to connect them when they're not connecting, but I like to think of this sort of daydream atmosphere. When Debussy reaches the shores of these arpeggios he had developed through the opening, which was idle and contemplative, spasmic capsules of thematic material, almost like embryos, which sort of emerge and surprise us and go nowhere except in the echo, in the ripples of the water. But when he reaches, of course, he uses for the water arpeggiation imitation. We all associate Debussy to the full tone scale, which he didn't initiate, but of course used so much. The augmented fifth with the major thirds, and the flotation atmosphere coming from the fact there is no tension release. You cannot make a perfect cadence in whole tone. That would be silly. But the idea of it is that he reaches this very high moment of either with the C flat or the C major, and this whole tone. To practice for that articulation of the thumb, or with a diminished fifth. So one is minor seventh, with this major seventh. But it's not really minor major in the in temperament of mood. It's more about color, literally color. Like as if you have some kind of gray on beige with a little bit of black, and on top perhaps some cream. These kind of very close tones to each other in colors, not something in this mood, in this section, not something jumping out. It has to be subtle. It has to be not whispered, and that's the problem. Most pianists, when play Debussy, they try to be so subtle that they become shy, because then the expression box, if I may say, the ratio is very diminished, but it has to exist in the minimal stretch, but with all the sub-nuances, and it shouldn't be only because it's fortissimo to pianissimo. It can have the same ratio, but between pianissimo and mezzo piano, for instance. And therefore it has to be played with clarity, and I would say even with scratching the keys, even in the quick 30 seconds, and use the thumb as a positively like a pivot. And the tips have to touch with the equal lightness, precision on the edge of the keys, because in the depth of the keys, the action is heavier on the piano. Individually, well, you want to hear them as a veil dropping in the air, well, it's a transparent veil. So of course, for this kind of pattern practice, you have to divide it by intervals. Observe your wrist, that you don't turn in order to accommodate the passing of the thumb, that you lift the wrist enough for the thumb to be straight as a pivot. It's a bit stretchy to pass the thumb under the octave, but it's possible if you lift enough your elbow. You touch it with the tip of the thumb, and then the thumb escapes outside the circle of the keyboard to land and prepare landing before the next C flat or the next C natural, regarding on which octave you're placed. Of course, you have to practice in rhythms, and of course in hold and bow. I say of course, it's not of course, but it's suggested. And then so you have to have this kind of tip of fingers that scratch after they play it with precision, a bit like suction cuffs. So you have to get the stability of the pattern that you hold, and then display the fingers from very close up in the keys, as if you whisper from close up. And then you put pedal more or less waiting an octave at a time, and then change here. But more or less half pedal in order not to be noisy and blurry. It's at one very delicate moment where you realize that you're blurry enough to get a halo to the sound. At the same time, you want to hear precisely all those drips, drops, needles, if it is, which contrast with the bass note. These are more like tenuto by horns, like French horns. Should be drastically outlined. For instance, it shouldn't be. Very often the melody or the theme, whatever you want to call it, the leitmotif, is played too loud in order to balance the fact that the right hand bubbles loud with the long pedal and the articulation if it's heavy. So Although, of course, I'm an advocate for non-shy Debussy playing, but that doesn't mean that it has to be matter-of-fact extroverted. It has to be clearly projected in a whisper. Like actors practice their whisper in order to be clear with the consonants and the vowels. But more consonant than vowel. And here more vowel than consonant. Very calculated ritenuto rhythmically. So half pedal, half pedal, half pedal, half pedal. So you keep a residue of the harmony, but little by little disappearing, just like sand on the beach when you do a castle, and then the water comes and little of the castle just melts and merges in the waters. So you can keep a little bit of the two, this and then off here, on and off, on and off, on and off. It's almost like my name. the waves still float in the air. The climax, if one could speak of that in a dramatic way more than in a tonal way, comes at the point of the augmented fifth C sharp. After this very slow lifting of the C level, started from the depth of the abyss. Would have written it in a way more or less rigidly in terms of the notation, but Debussy manages to find the clarity of the notation that translates in the performance into an inspired, improvisatory, spontaneous flow. And that is really the miracle of the notation, because anything else would be either too much in details, therefore it will lock the imagination of the performer. And on the other hand, if it's just free, barless, all gruppettos of cadenza, little notes, it will be then a little bit probably overused for total freedom. The triplets in the arpeggios in the right hand, you have to highlight the tip of each first. So it builds up from the minor triad, first inversion, to the augmented fifth, but not in B flat minor, nor in anywhere. It's not settled in a tonal, let's say, landscape. It's more about a mood landscape. Anything to unsettle the mood, because we don't know which is the arrival point. Is it A to B, or C sharp to D if it's not E flat? Just know that something is coming from the deep up and slowly rising until, like a geyser, it floats on the top. It doesn't even need to be explained. It's so self-explanatory when you hear it, even if you have no clue of anything. The syncopated second half of each of these ascending octaves, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, contrast with the sextuplets of 16th notes. Allows to memorize the imprints and the close-up picking of the cherries. And the dispositions and the anticipations is so important to prepare each of the positions before they are played scientifically, or memorize them like a topography of a terrain. Where are the mounds, where are the rivers, where are you going to take the best trajectory in order to play at the level of low flying zone, under the radar, but always precisely gliding. You don't want any asperity, any accent, any angular situation. You don't want to be betrayed by your thumb, nor to be betrayed by your black keys, or by any keys. While the bass, deep but not loud. The thumb more than the fifth finger. Really 3D basses. Not matter of fact. Thick, heavy with the fifth finger is all, equal to the thumb. So sort of double basses in echo of the celli. On the top of each triplet, and then the cotton reality of air legato harmonic fill up, which is the second and third. Is it Vitus? Dot, two slur, the whole thing in the pedal, marinated enough to be just tasty. But none of these effects should be exaggerated, no accents, just impulses, like little electric shocks. And the pedal shaking in the middle of each chord. Like you're doing magic, like it's not the relatively obvious percussive instrument, the piano, but it's all of a sudden some kind of a mysterious lake with something going to come out, rising. And the most important is that a good crescendo is a delayed crescendo, so you let the music rise and you don't rise dramatically with pushing your energy onto it with your muscles, but later, almost when the splashes go above the surface, this is subsurface. But you want to be clear. It's always this combination of halo with clarity. You have to search for it constantly because it's so easily goes from one section where you could be very redundantly round to the section where you could be overly precise. Sandwiching of several layers of thematical embryos. The whole thing with scales of whole tone, almost like waves over these rocks, perhaps in the water. Collage, almost like a fragmentation of some element that doesn't correspond obviously at first view to the whole thing. At first thought you think, oh, what is this? Perhaps a lost Brahms piece, just a few bars of it. It almost feels like one of these, where is it from? You have to be bewildered, like wondering yourself as a performer, perhaps fake because like artists do, but inevitably actors do that. 3 triads of 6/4 consecutive on full tone, on an A major triad, with a downbeat 30 seconds, short long, Lombardic rhythm, and here the same in extension of lazy triplets. direction of the action, in augmentation as we call it for the values. There is our leitmotif of the opening, our leitmotif of the melody, as if they all come to roost at the end. All these embryos. In a very subtle way, they sort of merge. So in the long coda, he has this open tenths, dark in the bottom of the keyboard, and those drops of water with the ripples that you can almost see when you throw, let's say, a small stone on the mirror surfaced lake or water pond. I was taught by Mademoiselle Bousseau at the Paris Conservatoire, and as an obedient child I accepted it, that in the coda of the Reflets dans l'eau, reflections in the water, you play the theme in the reversed drop of octavization arpeggiated, and not, there is no indication of the direction, but it's supposed to be a tradition. So I don't know if it's a rightful tradition or not, but of course it's made to bring out the symbolic material of the leitmotif which we had in the opening, exactly in the same middle of the keys. Had you had it in the direction going up, which is the logical notation when you have this kind of noodles on the octave, we would hear equally the same, but perhaps from another point of view, direction going up instead of dropping down. And I must confess, I was a child and I was very docile and obedient, not uncurious and uncreative, but very docile. And so I was just adopting it for what I was told. Now, as a teacher, I don't believe that is necessary, but I like to perpetuate the tradition, but name it as well, to just put it in relativity after all. It doesn't justify a good or bad interpretation, it's just a little, perhaps, gimmick, ultimately. Because anyway, the music is there. Same with those. Is it A-A-F-F, as written, the two broken octaves bottom up, with the left hand up for the A flat, and F-F dropping and creating a little melodic, let's say, another embryo of melodic motif. Da-da-da-da. Ah, silly little things at the end. They cloud the meaningful things, which are the dark chords, the three notes of the original leitmotif. And rhythmically he distantiates them by subtle rhythmic precisions in the notation, where the values are delayed in hemiolas, dotted quarters, and all kinds. So you have to count 1, 2, 3, 1. It's very much an organization, but it shouldn't appear organized, but it is. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Evaporate and replay. 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Drop. 2, 3, 4. Almost fade the sound dying. 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. the pedal, the right foot pedal, seems to have fascinated composers to start with the London sonatas of Haydn, where he started using it on his knee for some of the sonatas, to have these kind of moments where they're all resonating, or Beethoven in the Tempest, wake up in the recitativo. Or Schumann. In the Eusebius of the Carnival. Of course, the instruments and the pedalizations evolve with the instruments and the hearing of the performers, the length of sound of the instruments, but on the surface it remains the writing. Thank you.